right, let's get started. So everyone will know today's session is all about how you can be more effective using AI and technology rather than just being more efficient. And I wanted to set off the conversation with some context because I think there's an interesting relationship between effectiveness and efficiency. And funny enough, the day that we decided that this would be kind of the topic for this conversation, I heard a great quote from Tim Ferriss, and he said, "Effectiveness is what you do, efficiency is how you do something. But doing something well or efficiently doesn't make it important or high leverage. The task that you choose matters more than how you do any given task." And I thought that was really relevant to this idea that we need to focus on the higher priority, important things that move the needle and do them well, rather than just doing meaningless stuff more effectively. So, Mel, kick us off. What are your thoughts on this relationship between the two things, effectiveness and efficiency?
Yeah, I think that's a great quote. I think it really hits the nail on the head. I've used a similar one in the past, and I don't know where it came from. I probably saw it somewhere on LinkedIn, who knows? But it's basically that it's the difference between doing things right versus doing the right things, efficiency versus effectiveness. And the reason I like that, the reason I think this is a really interesting topic is because it's not an either or, right? Nobody's going to argue that you don't need to do the right things or that you shouldn't do things right. It doesn't have to be either or. It should be both. I think the problem is, though, that it's easier to do things right. Being efficient is easier than being effective. And I think part of the reason for that is we just have much more practice at it, right? If you think about when you start a new job, new L&D manager or new junior software developer or something like that, usually you're going to be given the set of tasks that are going to make you optimal at your job. And then you're going to be given the training to help you understand how to perform these tasks. Each task has a specific outcome. You know what that outcome needs to be. And so when you've learned your task, you're pretty efficient at it. And then as new technologies come on the scene, you know what the outcome of each task is, so you can more easily understand how to slot those technologies in to make you more efficient, which is great. But the problem is you don't get as much opportunity to practice being more effective, to really step back and think about, like, what are the right things that I should be doing or that we should be doing as an organization. And I think the reason for that is, again, when you start a particular job role, you're given the set of right things. Somebody has already done the calculation. There's like an ROI calculation behind a role or a team that says, if I invest in an individual to do these things, this is the objective they're going to meet. This is the value proposition of it. And that doesn't change that often, right? Probably the right things that you were doing on day one of your job were actually the same right things that you would have been doing a year into the job or 2 years into the job. But then every once in a while, you get these massive shocks to the system, massive shocks to, like, the global economy and all of the companies that participate in it. And a lot of times those shocks are technical, like technical in nature, technical advancements. And I don't really need to go into this. I'm sure most people already fully understand this, but that's effectively what's happening here, right? If you think back to things like the internet and how that changed the world with e-commerce and email, think about robotics, particularly in the space of manufacturing, mobile devices, and how they've proliferated over the last 10 years, social media. And now we're in a new one brought about by foundation models, or more generally AI. And so the real trick here is to understand that this is an opportunity to now rethink. Not an opportunity, but as organizations, we need to rethink what is effective. What are the right tasks to be done? And I think there's two traits of companies that will not just survive, but excel off the tailwinds of this change. The companies that understand that this is the new paradigm that we're in right now, and change needs to happen. And then the companies that are able to capitalize on that change, effectively leverage AI to adapt and move forward.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's an interesting one. Companies sometimes, when things happen fast, they rely on stuff that was already set in stone or decided before the change happened, and then they don't reprioritize the task. So I completely see that. Nelson, what are your thoughts on this thing, the relationship between being effective and being efficient?
Yeah, I think Mel alluded to some great points here around, often when we see a new breakthrough technology come in, often we kind of rush to recreate what we were already doing, but with this new tech, right? Like if you look at like ebooks, we could have done anything with that format natively, but we decided to replicate a physical book in the form of that, right? And even audiobooks. We could have done anything with the format, but essentially we got someone to read a book, record it, and share it. But now we're starting to get, sound effects, actors, and we're evolving on the format, what you can do natively. And so what we're seeing is what happens with every wave of kind of a new breakthrough technology is we try to use the technology to do the things we were already doing, but slightly better. But there's a lot of data that's coming out now to demonstrate actually that's not where we're going to see the big wins, right? Because it's not helping us be more effective. Like there's a bit of data that came out from recent research by Deloitte that said companies that were predominantly using AI for automation were actually seeing 50% lower return on investment versus organizations who are using AI for also strategic benefits. And that's also kind of supported by a report that IBM recently put out saying that organizations who are using AI for innovation rather than just cost cutting were 6 times more likely to see financial gains, right? And so in essence, what that kind of supports is what Mel touched on at the beginning. It's not an either or. It's not you're either being efficient or you're being effective. And the problem we have right now is a lot of people's early application of AI and what they're optimizing for is essentially to use AI to be more efficient, which, as we've kind of touched on, could mean you're doing the wrong thing more efficiently. And, no one gets to keep their job for doing the wrong thing more efficiently. And so that's really where it kind of raises a problem. Kind of applying this to L&D, if you look at, I think it was last year where the numbers were around, about 45 billion was spent on learning content globally. Now, in the same year, when employees were surveyed, it came out that essentially about 12% of employees said they got any meaningful skills that they were able to apply from this. So what that essentially tells us, about 88% of people didn't really take away any skills from the learning that they'd engaged with or didn't engage with. And so there's a lot of wastage going in. Now, let's throw AI into this mix. And let's say we're now scaling that problem, but we're doing it far more efficiently, right? So we wrote this down in a mathematical formula. We essentially have lots and lots of content fueled by AI efficiency, a lot less context, which essentially means we've now got a lot more crap and a lot more wastage. And the more crap we throw at employees, and the more immune they become to it. The harder it becomes to be able to engage them because we're constantly throwing crap at them that's irrelevant. And so actually what we can end up doing is using AI to scale the very problem it was supposed to help us solve, which is kind of overloading information and overwhelming people with a lot of irrelevant stuff. So it is dangerous just using AI to be efficient if we're not got an eye on being more effective.
Mel, I saw you agreeing with Nelson there when he talked about the idea of bombarding people with content maybe or churning out more. So kind of before we move on, any thoughts on what Nelson just shared there?
No, I think he's spot on. It reminded me of another AI story, which was trying to get a different message across around like AI safety, but it's around if you asked an AI to like create paper clips, you might just end up with an AI that starts to take over the world and starts to take over the universe solely for the purpose of creating paper clips. I think this story is more about like, we should be concerned about how we use AI. But the same problem is true with, what Nelson was saying. Like if you start to use AI to do the things you used to do back when they were effective in the old way of doing things and they're not effective today, you will effectively run your company into the ground. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I think that data you shared, Nelson, around the idea of the efficiency or the impact of saving costs, cutting time versus actually finding real problems to solve strategically leads us nicely onto this next point, which actually, how do we find problems that AI and tech can solve and kind of be more strategic about that? Nelson, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I guess a good one here is actually looking towards maths, right? And maths is all about problem solving. And so often I find myself leaning on ways around it. In maths, there's the kind of this idea of local maximum and global maximum. Like in simple terms, what that means is, let's imagine we all went for a walk in a park and we see this kind of local, this small hill. and we go, oh, I want to climb up this small hill and enjoy the view. And so we climb up the hill and we're enjoying the view. And we might think that this is the highest peak in the park. But someone walks past and goes, actually, there's a much, much bigger hill on the other side of the park that you can't see. And that's the highest peak. And in maths, you would call that the global maximum because it's the most optimal solution to the problem. And the hill that you're standing on is the local maximum. Now, why is this important? Because it's important for us to know, are we standing on the local maximum or the global maximum? Because you might kid yourself that you're standing in the most optimal solution to a problem and therefore not exploring better ways of solving that problem and actually finding the real problem you need. We often make this mistake when we're over prioritizing cost cutting over delivering more value to the organization we're in, right? And so it's one of the risks of staying on the local maximum is actually you might not be having as much or delivering as much value to the organization you could be. So the kind of search is to go, what is the global maximum? Now, often what we find in, like, if you take L&D and HR, it's not that we don't know what the global maximum, what problem we should be focusing on. But what we tend to do, and as humans we tend to do this, is we move towards the direction of the thing that's easier for us to do. Now, let me give you an example of why do we follow the format of a lecturer standing on the front of a lecture hall, lecturing 1,000 people. We don't use that format because it's the most effective way of learning. Actually, it isn't. We do that format because it's the most efficient way of distributing information and content, right? It's the most effective way. You've got one lecturer who's an expert, and the easiest way is pack the lecture hall with as many people. That's an example of us doing something because it's the most efficient way of distributing information, but it's not the most effective way of learning and achieving the outcome, right? So what we have there is a local maximum. It's somewhat doing what we need, but it's not the global maximum of what we need to solve. So that's why we step back and ask ourselves in L&D, what is that global, what is the highest peak and in L&D for us to do? Well, it's fundamentally, we step back and ask the big picture question is we need to know what are the skills gaps that are holding us back as an organization, as a team, as an individual, and we need to be able to bridge those skills gaps through relevant learning that's integrated into the flow of work. That's the holy grail. That's what we're all trying to do, right? But are we all doing that? No, because we speak to L&D people day in, day out. We don't do that, not because we're not aware that that's what we should be doing, but we do the things that are, actually easier to do and show some output. It's easier for me to create 100 courses and show I've created 100 courses than it is for me to be able to say, well, I've measured the skills gaps that we have, and this is how we can bridge the gap by connecting. Well, it's a lot more of a complex problem to solve. That's where we can leverage AI. And that's why it's really important for us to really identify what is the global maximum, what is the actual problem that I need to solve that's going to help me have the biggest impact on the organization, and let me leverage and apply AI to be able to tackle that, right? It's not about using AI to climb that small peak, which you could already climb, but AI is helping you climb that peak slightly faster with a lot less sweat. What you want to do is be able to climb that highest peak that you wouldn't have been able to climb without the help of AI. And I think that's why it's important we find the right problem to solve.
No, brilliant. I'm glad you mentioned skills there, Nelson. Actually, I'll drop a link in the chat now, but we're going to be talking about skills-driven L&D next week. Nelson and I joining a webinar all about how you do that more specific issue. But Mel, to come back to what we're talking about here, I know you have a similar perspective on terms of working out actually what's going to move the needle for your business and then seeing where the tech comes in. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to touch on the hill analogy, which I think is super cool. One of the reasons is also because you've put sort of an emotional investment and a physical effort when you think about the hill into climbing that hill. And so in particular, in the cases where you can't actually see the higher hill and somebody else is just telling you about it, you're taking a risk and you have an emotional attachment to the work that you've already put in. And to put that more tangibly, like I have a story of a friend of mine that I worked with at a financial institution. He was in a different financial institution, but They were very cutting edge, and they had invested millions of dollars in building a data analytics platform back in the early 2000s, before data analytics platforms were ubiquitous. And that was part of the contribution to their value proposition. It was significant. And they just kept evolving it over time. But what started to happen was globally, everybody started to realize the value of data and the value of data analytics. And companies completely dedicated to building data analytics platforms started to spring up. But they were so focused on the value add that their component brought to them that by the time they realized that they were investing millions and millions annually in this data platform, they could have actually licensed something of similar caliber for a fraction of the price. And to use the hill analogy, like by the time, you know, the clouds have parted and you can actually see the higher hill, it's probably already very crowded with other people who took the risk and went up that hill, and now they're enjoying the beautiful sunset or whatever the case may be. So I think, yeah, Nelson, it's a very powerful analogy. On the topic of, like, you know, how do we find the problems for AI? Or if you were to restate it a little bit, like, how do we leverage AI to be more effective? You can break that into two components, right? One is leveraging AI and one is being more effective. And the two don't have to be the same. You can be very effective even today without AI. But for the first part, in order to leverage AI, I think you need to understand AI. And so you need to understand at least the capabilities of it, right? You don't need to understand how a neural network operates. You don't need to understand the intricacies of a foundation model. But in much the same way that you might think about how to use a car, you don't need to understand the laws of physics or engine mechanics. You just need to figure out how to drive the thing and how to use a map. And you actually don't even need to know how to use a map anymore, and you're on your way. I think the same is true of AI. We need to understand what the strengths and limitations of different AI systems are. And perhaps most importantly, what the trajectory of AI looks like. If you think back to some of the things that have happened in the past, like the internet, like mobile devices, what they looked like when the whole world realized that things were changing, very different than what they looked like 5 years later or 10 years later. So when you're thinking about the kind of the cycles or the horizons that companies are typically looking at, like 5 years out, 10 years out, you also want to understand where AI is going so you can be aptly positioned for what you want to achieve in the future. Now, the best thing about this in my mind is, because this is an AI problem, you can actually use AI to learn about AI. And I'm sure everybody on this call already has an understanding of, like, capabilities of AI. That's probably why you're here. But I will tell you that, like, on a daily basis, I have conversations with ChatGPT. I talk to ChatGPT for an hour just preparing for this webinar. And if you haven't already done it, I would highly recommend it. If there's one thing that I could say, like, is worth really taking away from all of these ramblings that I'm throwing at you, it's get a hold of, like, something like ChatGPT. It doesn't have to be ChatGPT, and ask it to explain the strengths and weaknesses of AI and the limitations of AI, and ask it to pontificate about where AI is going. It's drawing on a much wider knowledge base than you're going to be able to draw on yourself. And it can personalize the information for you. So to answer that second part of the question, like, how do you use AI to be more effective? Well, you can ask the AI to help you with that as well. It can tell you, based on, you know, your domain, your organization, or your company's value proposition, how you should be thinking about retraining people within that organization so that they can be more effective at meeting the new right things as your organization moves forward.
Something you said there reminds me of an issue that's come up in 3 or 4 conversations I've had recently, but it's the idea of starting with where your business makes money or where your business is going, working backwards from there and looking at what's needed to get there, and then working a step back from there and looking at what tech is needed. And I mean, it'd be interesting to hear both of your thoughts. Is that a better place to start, is actually to really align yourself to where the business is going or where it makes money now, understand the problems that are limiting that, and then thinking about tech and your role in that, as opposed to working the other way and getting the tech and forcing it onto problems and the strategy of the business?
Well, let me say one thing to augment that, what I just said, and answer your question. Then Nelson, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I think if you take a top-down approach, then you start to rethink what the value proposition is at the top. And then that can inform changes that need to be made to the value proposition at a level down in the organization. And in that way, you can strategically, like, orient the direction of the company at the very top and then start using AI and thinking through how to be effective and align yourself with that as you go down the various different levels. If you start at the bottom and work up, you haven't changed the value proposition for like individual contributors or at the bottom layer. So now you're in the world of using AI to be more efficient. You definitely use it, but you'll end up just doing the things that you're doing more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this as the founder of a B2B SaaS company, but I don't think it's ever healthy or helpful to start from a tech first or tool first approach, because fundamentally, I mean, if you've ever been on one of our shows before, you've probably heard me say, you know, love the problem, not the solution. And I'm a big believer in that, because it's the problem is what we're there for. It's the motivation. It's what we're trying to solve, and it's solving the problem that gets us the outcome, that the desired outcome that we want to see. And you know, if leveraging AI is going to help you solve a problem you couldn't before, or solve that problem better or differently, then yeah, then by all means leverage AI. But I think what we're seeing a lot now, and it's not a bad thing, you know, people are curious, and we're seeing a lot of people trying to fit AI into everything and anything, right? But I think, again, what will help us prioritize how we leverage AI will come down to those big, meaningful problems that we need to solve. So, you know, from an organizational perspective, I genuinely believe the organization that will win is the person who knows the customer's problem better than the customer does, right? And that fundamental piece doesn't change. Where there's AI today and another technology tomorrow, that those fundamentals don't change. So it's not about saying now there's AI as an organization, I need to do A, B, and C. I think the question is going, now there's AI, what problems does the customer have, whether that's an internal customer or an external customer, and that I couldn't solve before that I can solve now, or is there something else I can do in a more meaningful way to solve this fundamental problem that the internal or external customer has?
I think that's kind of part of it, isn't it? Like aligning to the problems that need to be solved, finding those. But I guess another part of the equation is understanding your organization's context right now. You know, where are we? What foundation would be required for us to use AI effectively? Because it's not as simple as find a problem, find a tool, and it kind of works. There's this additional context. So, Mel, how can we do that part of, you know, working out where we are, seeing what foundation is required for us to put in place to start using AI and other tech effectively?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's important to understand where you are today, to understand where you're able to get to. And I have a few thoughts on like things that I would see as foundational in order to be able to really capitalize on AI. The good thing is that some of these things can be changed if you're like, oh well, my company doesn't do that right now. They can be implemented, and then you can build AI on top of them. But I think probably for me that the most important is probably having a data-driven mindset across the organization and the data infrastructure to back that up, right? AI is going to do better the more data you can provide to it. To make it more tangible, like to think about something that is closer to home for L&D. You know, we talk about content delivery, we talk about personalization. That's come up a lot with AI. If you're going to personalize something, then you need to know about that person more than just their name, more than just their job title. In order to be really effective, you need to understand as much as you can about them. So gathering, you know, performance reviews, job descriptions, things like that. But not just the individual, right? You want to be able to understand how that individual fits into the team. What are the team's objectives? How that team fits into an organization. A number of companies today implement strategies like OKRs or KPIs, key performance indicators, different metrics by which, you know, various levels of the organization will commit to doing something, to bringing about some outcome that's measurable. And then at the end of a period, like a quarter or a half, retrospectively take a look back at their performance and measure it against what they said they would do. So if you're able to feed this data, if you have the data infrastructure that's capturing all of this in a structured manner, then you can feed it into AIs that really will allow you to be able to generate more personalized learning or understand what different components of an organization need to learn or need to do in order to get where you want them to be. And specifically, like I'm talking about like structured databases. So if you have like Excel files all over the place, then you kind of want to move towards a more structured approach. Lots of people use different applications to serve different functions. applications that are kind of API enabled so they can all speak to each other and move data freely are definitely going to be your friend as you move into an AI world. A couple of other things that I think are important, probably next to like data culture, would be a culture of experimentation and innovation. Across the board, when you think about AI, people are going to need to be able to marry their domain expertise to what they can use AI for, right? Previously, I mentioned like you as an L&D manager might want to use AI to understand how best to identify the areas that you can provide education across a company. But it's people with domain expertise that are going to be able to understand how AI can help them achieve their task, be most effective in their role. And so in order for somebody to be able to embrace that, then the culture of the organization needs to be one that will embrace learning, embrace experimentation, embrace innovation, to an extent, embrace failure, because that comes along with experimentation and innovation. You're not going to be right all the time. But when you figure out how to do it, you can dial it in and expand, then things work extremely well. And then related to that, I would say, is the cross-organizational communication component. When you look at your organization, is it very siloed, or are all the organizations collaborating and speaking with each other? We mentioned that AI works better with large volumes of data. And if you want it to be more effective with respect to understanding the value proposition of an organization or the company, then you need to be able to draw on information that's coming from different parts of the organization. And if you can do that, if you already have a culture where people are sharing information, you can start to apply AI across organizations for a much more effective approach, as opposed to within a single organization or within a single team, which is going to get you back on the efficiency approach. And I think the last thing I'll say, we're talking about like cross-organization. In order to truly be effective, you need leadership buy-in, or at least leadership buy-in within the domain where you're trying to affect change. Champions who actually believe that AI can have a meaningful impact on the way that they do business and help them improve their value proposition to their customer.
Yeah.
And I will leave it at that.
Are you getting some love in the chat and some agreement there, Mel? So that's great. No, so maybe to come at this from a slightly different side, let's say we're sitting down to work out organizations' context, work out whether a piece of tech is a good fit for our problems, but is it also a good fit for our business? What were your thoughts on that, I guess, really understanding the context and if something's right for your business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we've touched on and probably worth reiterating. It does come, in terms of knowing whether tech's right for us, it does come down to the problem you're solving, right? And how it fits into your current tech stack. So going kind of deep into some of the principles Mel touched on, if you've right now, say the only bit of learning tech you've got is a learning management system that's completely siloed from the rest of the business, right? Like it doesn't, let's say it's not speaking to your HR system, it's not speaking to any of the other internal learning or knowledge systems that you have within your organization, it's not integrated with any of your productivity tools or performance systems. Like that's a large chunk of context that already exists in your business that this learning platform is completely unaware of, right? And so when you're thinking about your tool, you need a tool that's going to be able to fit into your ecosystem, but also interact and talk to your ecosystem. It's a big chunk of the work we do with organizations we work with. It's a big part of it is essentially looking at the data. We look at the data in your HR system to figure out what your organization's skills framework should look like. What are the required skills and skill levels for every employee? We look at all of your knowledge and learning repositories and tools to kind of map that to skills and tell you whether do you have learning opportunities that are going to plug this skills gap or not. We connect into productivity tools to deliver learning in that moment of need where you're most motivated to engage with it. To be able to do all of that and leverage AI to do that, you need to bring in platforms and tools that are going to be able to, like Mel touched on, through APIs or other ways to be able to integrate and speak with the rest of your ecosystem. And so I think that's a key part. And the only other thing I'd add, and we kind of alluded to this earlier on, is often what you see in companies is sunk cost fallacy, right? Where you bought this tool, it's not doing it. It's not doing it. It's not doing it's not helping you achieve the desired outcome. People are not using it. And, in your head, you're kind of thinking, well, you know what, we've got this here. We need to make do with this. And it seems like the less riskier option is to stick with this thing that's not really working rather than change. The reality is everyone hates change, right? There was a great bit of research that came out by University of Huddersfield that says 78% of people would stick with the thing they're doing, even if they knew switching would get them a better outcome. That's how much people hate change, right? And so that's exactly what we do with sunk cost fallacies. We stick with the tools and platforms that we have, even if it's not delivering outcome, because the change carries risk, right? But actually, it's recognizing the bigger risk is with not switching to something that's going to help you solve the problem in a meaningful way. It's far more risky because in those situations, the status quo is unacceptable, and it means there's going to be genuine risk for you, or you're going to miss an opportunity. And so that's something to think about when you're thinking about your technology landscape and ecosystem in your business is, how much of this is sunk cost fallacy? And really being brutal in those decisions around, is this the tech and tool that's going to help us achieve this goal?
Yeah, I feel that is a personal experience I had recently because I can't remember what it was, but I finally switched over from one tool to another, and I've been putting it off for months because I thought it was going to be a lot of admin. It was no admin. It took me about 2 minutes, and then the new tool was far better equipped to solve the problem. Nelson, you mentioned a bit about HowNow there. I'm going to drop a link in the chat just in case anyone wants to know a bit more about what we do and those problems you mentioned that we solve for our customers. We're going to move on to a couple more questions in a second, but Mel, I wanted to come back to something we discussed last time we spoke around this idea of your organization's current context, your readiness, and you mentioned that there might be false signals, I think around maybe your readiness to use tech or what tech might be a good fit for you. So would you be able to share any of those kind of concepts of the false signals you might need to look out for as you go through this process?
Sorry, Gary, you'll have to refresh my memory here. We're talking about signals that you should ignore.
Yeah, like false signals that you
have them
might
on
be
top.
ready for tech or like around your organization's tech structure or culture. Yeah, if there's anything you wanted to share on that before we moved on.
I mean, I would go back to what I said earlier and say predominantly it's going to be the data infrastructure and the application infrastructure that you have already embraced from a technical perspective. Organizationally, how much are those applications already talking to each other? How much structured information is an organization placing into its various different repositories? How freely accessible is that information to other parts of the org? Similar to what Nelson said, right? If you have like HRIS systems, if you have LMS systems, you have accounting, you have IT, there's a lot of value add in being able to merge this information in various different ways and then feed that into a whole slew of AI applications that are on the horizon that will enable you as L&D managers to achieve your goals, like propagating knowledge to the far reaches of the organization, but also enable each of the individuals working on their own domain-specific technology to embrace AI. So I think some of the false signal is not understanding what it actually means to be kind of data first or data enabled, not understanding what it means for applications to be able to communicate with each other. And I think, that's definitely, it's a conversation where your IT organization should be your friend and your guide here. They're going to understand this intimately. It's within their domain. And I think they'll be able to help with ideation around where AI can effectively be plugged in today and what infrastructure components need to be fleshed out and implemented in order to enable other parts of the organization to excel.
Brilliant.
I mean, to give a real example to this, like one of the organizations we were working with, they wanted to tackle burnout, and how they approached that was to actually work with the IT team to get access to data around who are the people who are sending messages on Teams or Slack out of hours, and who are the people sending emails out of hours. And they were able to look at that data to essentially segment their target audience of, okay, these are the people who are overworking, overstressed, and working outside of the hours. And they're the people who we need to be able to nudge with relevant learning resources and to be able to support them in how to better manage their work and tackle that burnout. But that's a good example of tapping into data that you already have in the organization to be able to segment and drive targeted or personalized learning. And alongside the technical integrations, sometimes what it takes is kind of stepping out of your team, your department, to kind of walk across the office and kind of speak to other teams, right? Like you're not going to tackle a sales performance issue in L&D without speaking to people in the sales team, right? And they have access to the data that can tell you whether you can help them improve that sales performance and what activity they're doing. And so you have to be able to partner and collaborate and eliminate those silos to be able to get access to data, both to personalize the learning experience, but also to see whether you're having the desired effect or not.
You guys are making my job easy because you both mentioned personalization there, and that is the next thing I wanted to discuss, because I think when we take this efficiency first mindset, especially using tech or AI, we really just look at the fastest way to get it done, or maybe the less personal way to get it done. But actually, personalization is a big part of that. And Mel, maybe kick us off. You gave some great examples before of what personalization isn't, but I know you've also got some great insights into how you're doing this at Talaera. So yeah, kick us off, Mel. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think personalization it's been around for a while. I think we can all probably agree that static content is not personalized. Everybody gets exactly the same piece. Various different companies have used technology to the best of their ability, given the limitations of technology, to try to bring in personalization. Everybody has seen these in terms of like recommender systems. Oh, you read this book, you should check out that book. You like this course, you should check out these courses. They're recommended for you. I think that's well and good. But with AI now, we can go much further in terms of personalization. And I'll give you an example. You asked like how we use it at Talaera. I'll bring in something that was pivotal for us in our way of thinking. If you had asked me like 5 years ago or 4 years ago what our value proposition was, I would have said it's content. We have a unique blend of knowledge and understanding of non-native English speakers and the challenges that they face, and business communication. How do you give effective presentations, negotiations, sales pitches, and the like? And when you think about non-native English speakers trying to achieve these, they face a different set of challenges than native English speakers as they progress on their journey towards native. And so if you'd asked me, 4 years ago, I would have said, we can build content. We're uniquely positioned to be able to build content to help non-native English speakers unlock their technical strengths and capabilities and shine and not be held back by English. If you ask me today, I would say that approach would doom the company. And the reason is that personalization has gone far beyond, here's some courses recommended to you because you told us your job description and your industry and whatnot, and into acknowledging that people learn in different ways. If each one of us reads the same book or reads the same lesson, we're going to have different questions. We're going to have different strengths and weaknesses. And so what we've been doing is, and this is just one example of using AI across the application and across the company, but leaning into exercises that are completely free form that allows the user to kind of express their understanding of whatever course or lesson it was that they were learning. And I'm sure as L&D professionals, everybody has seen courses that are all like multiple choice exercises to verify your understanding. And it's very limited. And at best, if you click the wrong answer as well, there's only 3. So the people designing the course were able to provide explanations as to why they're wrong. But it might completely miss the issues that the user is struggling with. So now we can use AI to allow the user to type in an answer to a free-form question, analyze that answer in the context of the course, but also bring in all of the other exercises that they answered, all of the other courses that they've interacted with, everything that we know about them, to be able to provide them specific feedback on the areas where they need to improve with respect to the lesson that they're working on, and then allow them to endlessly generate new exercises so that they can continue to focus on the things that they need in order to improve. And that, taking it one step further, we can make these exercises appropriate to the work environment of the individual. So instead of generically asking them questions about a day at the zoo or something like that, we know what their job role is and what their industry is. And so we can use the type of language that they're going to hear at work. And so this is just one example, but it's really allowed us to think more deeply about how to balance the engagement with the learning system and the effectiveness of the learning system together to basically like optimize the end result, which is knowledge acquisition, in our case, non-native English speakers being able to improve their English within business communications environment. Let me stop there because we're short on time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I mean, I never got as far as a day at the zoo, and some of the training I did, it was much more mundane than that. So actually I would sign up for the day at the zoo one compared to some of my really old first experiences. No, I
I'll
love
put
that,
it on the
Mel.
list for you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you. Nelson, from your perspective, how can we go about personalizing effectively using AI, to build on what Mel said there?
Yeah, so I guess we help organizations who are essentially trying to become skills-based organizations, right? That's essentially what companies are starting to realize is the kind of static job roles, and that approach to how we operate as an organization isn't fit for purpose. And we need to start looking at our workforce through the lens of skills, which also means the way we think about learning and development needs to be skills first, rather than thinking about content or training as the starting point for how we approach that. Which means, how do we align learning and learning paths and learning experiences to the gaps that people have? And so how we've leveraged generative AI for this is, if you think about the first question we need to be able to answer is what skills does this person need, right? What skills does this person need to have? And to what level of proficiency do they need to have that? Now, that's quite a complicated question to answer. So how do you get to that answer? And this is where generative AI can really help, where we essentially look at millions and millions of job market data points to identify what are the tasks that are typically associated with a job. And that's really, really key, because it's not a job that is associated with skills. It's the task that an individual does is what requires a certain skill to a certain proficiency level. And knowing what tasks that you need to do as a part of your job role helps us infer what are the skills and what are the required skill level you need to have in order to be able to execute that task to the level you need. Now, once we get an idea of how well you're executing that task, and you can look at things like plugging into, let's use a sales example. I could plug into your sales CRM and start to understand how well you're executing those tasks, right? How well are you building deal momentum? How well are you closing deals? And I can look at your ability to execute on those tasks to infer what level of proficiency you have. And once I've done that, I can now start to align relevant learning. And for that, you need the second part. You need all of your learning opportunities in your ecosystem, whether that's a course, whether it's coaching, whether it's mentoring or blog or podcast. It doesn't matter what type of learning opportunity it is. You need that learning opportunity to speak the same skills language as your organization, right? It's no good if every provider is tagging it with their own skills taxonomy and it's not even aligned to your organization. You need to speak the same skills language, because once you've identified that gap, you can now, at an individual level, connect the most relevant learning opportunity for the skills gap that's holding this person back from executing on their task, right? And this is a whole load of value that's unlocked by generative AI, where, prior to generative AI, you could have probably done at a cohort level or segment level personalization, right? I could have said everyone who has traits A, B, and C are going to get this content, and that's the level of personalization. But now you can generally, in a meaningful way, personalize to an individual level. And I saw a question come in the chat around kind of how you use this AI to support learning transfer. I think it ties in nicely with personalization, because a big part of learning transfer is that contextual feedback, right? When I apply it in that context, I'm getting relevant feedback that helps me improve the way I apply that. And that is personalization. I think it's moving away from this idea, and kind of Mel touched on this, is where personalization isn't me showing you, here's your recommended course, right? Personalization is also me giving you tailored feedback based on the action that you've taken. And it's that kind of tailored, timely feedback that helps enable that learning transfer, as one example of how you can use AI.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nelson. Mel's right. I'm going to have to be the stickler for keeping us to time, because I know we want to take some questions from the audience. But we talked a little bit about how this might be solved by using tech and platforms like HowNow and what Talaera do as well. But yeah, we just want to run through a couple of slides before we get into the Q&A. So Nelson, if you want to share your screen, and we can look at a little bit about how this works in practice.
Yeah, so it's a quick one, I guess, to give context in terms of what we do here at HowNow and at Talaera. So kicking that off, we essentially are a learning skills platform, touching on many of the topics that we've covered so far. But essentially, we help organizations create that skills framework. So to identify what skills they have in the organization, benchmark them against the rest of the industry to tell them what the required levels are for every single employee. And then we give you the tools to be able to assess what skills people have and don't have based on a 360 skills assessment tool. And we then bring all of your scattered learning together. That could be stuff that you're creating, third-party content libraries, content from across the web. One of our partners is Talaera as a part of our content product that we offer. But we bring all of these learning resources together, tag it with your organization's skills to connect the dots, so to connect people with relevant learning that's going to help them bridge those gaps. But we deliver that to them in a targeted way. So you can, mix up external and internal content to create AI pathways and deliver it directly within the tools where people work, whether that's Slack, Teams, Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever the tool they use on a day-to-day basis. We can deliver it in those moments of need where people are most likely to engage. And from an L&D, HR, and organization perspective, you now end up with a one-stop shop for all of your L&D data. So rather than having to go to 15 different tools to understand the learning and skills development and spend, you now have one place where you can go in and really assess the effectiveness of what you're doing in L&D and people development. And so we bring those four building blocks together, all under one roof. Over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Nelson. So I talked a little bit about, the value proposition of Talaera, non-native English speakers operating in an English-speaking environment, whether it's internally within an org or with customers or at conventions, and really being able to ensure that their technical capabilities are shining through because their capabilities with the language are top-notch. And the way that we approach that is a combination of software and humans. Ultimately, like, communication is a human-to-human thing. Sure, you can communicate with AIs more effectively these days, but most business is still done human to human. And that's what matters. And so foundationally, like the foundational component of the Talaera platform is a completely autonomous self-study system. You can access a wide variety of courses, the types of things that you need to learn to be an effective communicator at work. All of this is AI augmented in a way that I described earlier, but not just AI. There's a variety of different technological enhancements that enable the user to be able to learn more effectively. But then on top of that, we've layered various different offerings that speak to the different needs of different individuals and different groups. So everything from, personalized one-on-one training with a teacher that sits on top of the platform and integrates into the exercise system, speaking practice group sessions, which is just part of the self-study offering. So every week, or multiple times during the week, you can actually start communicating with other people in a teacher-led environment. And then expanding out from there, there's workshops, group sessions that are held inside of companies, webinars that have a much wider reach. But all of this is keyed off of the foundational content and AI learning system. I'll stop there.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you both. So I'm going to launch a poll now and leave it to run for a couple of minutes, but it will just ask you if you want to know a bit more about HowNow, Talaera, both of our platforms and services, or if you're okay with everything you already have. So if you are interested, just tick the right option on that poll and someone will get back in touch with you. Also, shout out to your marketing team, Mel. I love the turn ums into ahas. We talked about knowing your audience's problem earlier, and that is such a really shorthand way to resonate with people. I find that is I really like that. I'm very jealous of it. So we're going to get to questions in a second. So if anyone has any, drop them in the chat while we let the poll run. I have a greedy question of my own that I want to ask. And it's this idea of there's a spectrum around willingness to use AI. And at one end, we've got people who are really reluctant to use it. And at the other end, we've got people who want to use it for everything. So what are your thoughts on kind of where people sit, what your advice would be to people across that spectrum, or any thoughts you want to share on any of that? Maybe Mel, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's probably not a ton of these people that are on this call, because if you were the type of person that really feared AI, this is not the conversation you want to have. And if you're the type of person that leans into it, you probably already had this conversation with ChatGPT a year ago. That said, I think everybody on this call is going to encounter individuals across the spectrum and at both ends. And just super quickly, I think when you do encounter people that fear AI, you should understand why, because I think a lot of the fears are 100% legitimate. And a lot of those fears stem from things that Nelson and I talked about earlier, like resistance to change. But really understanding those are going to help you as an L&D manager affect that change within the organization. And on the other end of the spectrum, they've probably encountered a lot of the issues. They probably made mistakes that are still around the corner for you. So there's an opportunity to learn from them. Over to you, Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've touched on this before, Gary, where we say, there are sometimes trends and then there's like real trends. And often it's really hard to see, what's a fad and what's actually a paradigm shift. And, we get a lot of these, which kind of sometimes the risk is we might become very immune and desensitized to these things. First it was VR and AR, and then it was crypto, and people are like, there's so many of these things, they come and go, and so it's easy to make the mistake to think this is one of those fads which is going to come and go. This is a fundamental paradigm shift, and so I think that's the first thing to really kind of have the awareness around and acknowledge it. The second thing is that there's a lot of noise, and we've all probably felt it at some moment where like you go into LinkedIn or X and you're like, what the hell? Like 9 out of 10 posts is an AI post, and a lot of it is just kind of regurgitation of the same thing, and it's easy to think I just want to shut off from that. Now, don't shut off. What I would recommend is just take it one step at a time. Right, it's one step at a time. Long as you're making progress and you're being curious, and you're experimenting, and you're experimenting within your own environment to say, what, let me see if I can leverage AI to do X, right? And you play around with it. The extreme would be to shut off. I think the curiosity, and in today's day and age, you need to be quite brave to be curious, right? Like I feel like the risk we spoke about earlier and the fear of failure, you really need to be brave to push yourself out of your comfort zone and experiment and try, and that's key. And so it's completely fine to feel overwhelmed. I think we're in tech, right? And we sometimes feel overwhelmed. But I think it's just about reining it in, going back to the fundamentals, and kind of take one step at a time to experiment and get comfortable with it.
I completely agree. It does feel like we're in that bit of a zone where people are confusing the volume of people talking about it, and maybe people kind of repeating the same talking points as it being another gimmick. But it's important to make sure you don't fall into that mindset and you do maintain curiosity. There was something we didn't get to earlier as well that I wanted to ask you about, Nelson, and you gave a great example for me before about how AI and tech can be pushed onto teams when it's not necessarily the right fit. So I think the example was like a chat in some sort of chat interface that actually doesn't have the right UX for people. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, the way I think there's a bit of a conflation going on here, where people think bringing in generative AI is bringing in chat interface, right? It's almost like become a synonym, and let's hope that's not true, because the belief that people have is the world is just going to become one big chatbot, which I don't think is going to happen. What we need to understand is the chat UX is great for some things and it isn't for others, right? And sometimes we use the example of saying a chat is great for known unknowns, right? Where I know I don't know this thing and therefore I'm asking a question with a very specific intent. But chat is a lot harder with unknown unknowns, right? Where I don't know what I should be asking, right? And like I now need to discover something. And chat there isn't as powerful because it takes a lot of skill to know what you need to be asking. I mean, there's a great bit of data I was reading about where they showed, ChatGPT had this explosive adoption, but at certain points the engagement plateaued. And when they looked into the data behind it, it is because people who weren't great at writing a prompt and interacting with ChatGPT weren't getting a lot of value out of it. And if they weren't getting a lot of value out of it, they stopped using it, apart from for very basic things. And so they required a lot of skill and ability in the user to be able to get the value they needed out of it. So that's why I don't think a chat is going to be the interface for everything. And I think if you are someone who's in a position of designing experiences within your organization, really ask yourself the question of, is chat the right UX for what you're trying to achieve? But that's a good example of, people trying to apply AI generative AI within every organization. It's like, we need a chatbot, right? Like, yeah, I was on a conversation with a potential customer who said almost like they needed to sprinkle generative AI on something, right? That's not the right approach. You can't have a dash of Gen AI on what you're trying to solve. That's not the way to approach it.
Just a light dusting of AI on top. Um, yeah, no, you're so right, Nelson. And actually, it's a point we didn't even get into today, but there's a whole point of enabling people to use tech effectively as well. So it's not even just a case of doing all those things. Actually, you can bring in tech, you could think it's going to solve a problem, but are you enabling people to use the tech effectively? I'm just going to put one last message in the chat. It's just some links to learn about HowNow and Talaera if anyone who missed those when I dropped them in earlier. Mel, we have 1 minute left. So was there anything you wanted to add on what Nelson just shared there before we wrap up?
No, I think he's completely right. I think, sprinkling generative AI is the wrong approach. Asking the questions of like, how can I shove AI into my organization or my solution is not going to be a winning strategy. Fundamentally, like understanding what you want to do and what AI can do and how to merge the two is the right way to move forward.
That's a brilliant note to end on because I think that's the sentiment of this whole conversation. So, Mel and Nelson, I want to thank you for such an interesting conversation. That time flew by, so I really enjoyed that. Thank you to everyone who joined us, who's still here. And if you're watching this recording, then also thank you for signing up and watching it back. Obviously, you missed the poll live, so if you are watching the recording, just grab the links in the description to learn a bit more about everything. But yeah, thank you both, and thank you everyone who joined us.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, everyone.